Hi, everybody, and thank you, Aaron, for bringing us into God's presence and ready to share a message from His Word. Oh, look, how did that happen? 2019 already. By the time we meet together again next week, it will be 2019. And I'm super amped because we're starting a new series to kick off the year. Quentin will be taking us through the Restart series, where we focus on how we can restart the year in the best way possible. How we can love God with all our heart, all our mind, and all our soul and strength. So I'm super excited about that, and I hope you'll be ready and back next week for that. Bring friends. It's going to be good. But before we get there, let's just take a moment. Enjoy the last few days of 2018. Let me ask you about your resolutions. Can you remember the resolutions you made at the beginning of 2018? If one of them was to come to church more often and you've come for the first time, well done. You just made it. One more day and it would have been a failure. And failure is so easy, isn't it? It's a lot easier than success. I'm sure we can all identify with what's called the New Year's Day prayer. It goes something like this. Dear Lord, so far the year's going well. I haven't lost my temper. I haven't been greedy, jealous, nasty, ugly, told any lies, and hurt anyone. I'm thankful for that. But Lord, in a few minutes, I'm going to get out of bed and face the day. And so I'm going to need a lot more help from here on out. So, failure, yeah, it's easy. But there's something about a new year that helps us to dream again, to dream new dreams. There was a couple who were going to have a big New Year's Eve party, and so the wife decided she would take a brief nap in the afternoon so that she'd be all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for the evening's festivities. Awakening from her nap, she comes bouncing into the lounge where her husband is sitting reading, and she says, "Honey, I've just had the most incredible dream. I dreamt that tonight at the party, you gave me this gift, and when I opened it, it was the most beautiful diamond ring. What do you think that dream means?" Her husband said, with a broad smile on his face, "Tonight you'll find out." So that evening, at the party, the husband gives his wife a beautifully wrapped gift. And eagerly she tears open the wrapping and takes out a book titled How to Interpret Dreams. I'm not sure what your dreams are for 2019. Let me share my dream. My dream is that we will come face to face with grace. More often than we did in this last year. Because it's my conviction that the best way to deal with failure, the best way to create hope of new beginnings and new starts, is to experience and to give grace. What do we mean by grace? And of course, if you've been a Christian for a long time, or even if you haven't, and you're just testing it out, you'll have heard the phrase, saved by grace. And that is the big grace, the capital letter grace, that Jesus Christ saved us from our terminal condition of sin through absolutely no effort or deserving or merit on our part. We experience that grace. But the grace I want to spend some time talking about with you today is slightly different. Because you see, the grace I've just spoken about, the capital letter grace, is that Jesus gave His life for you. But Jesus also gave His life to you. And what I mean by that is the story of Jesus' life, the everyday interactions He had with the people that He met, serves as a beautiful example and inspiration to us of how to live grace. And I'd like to focus in and hone in on one particular person, one particular relationship that Jesus had, and that is with Peter. Did you know that Of all the interactions and conversations recorded in the New Testament, the interactions between Jesus and Peter are the most frequent. And so I just picked a few of those to share with you today to help illustrate what I mean by coming face to face with grace. And the definition that we're going to work with for this is simple. I believe grace is how Jesus treats us. And as we look at Peter, I hope that becomes more and more clear to you as well. I'm going to start with where we meet Peter. The gospel account written by Dr. Luke is a well-researched, very methodical, clearly laid out description of the events of Jesus' life. And he describes Jesus and Simon Peter meeting as follows. Jesus has begun his ministry already. He's already attracted quite a following. He's created a stir. And so the crowds are flocking to hear him speak. And he's standing on the shores of the Sea of Galilee speaking. And the crowds are pressing in on him, and he realizes this isn't working very well. So he asks Simon Peter if he can step into his boat and just push it a little away from shore so that he can be seen and heard better by the crowds. So he sat in the boat and taught the crowds from there. We read in Luke chapter 5, verse 3. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Now go out where it's deeper and let down your nets to catch some fish." Remember, this is Jesus, the carpenter, speaking to Peter, the professional fisherman. "Master," Simon replied, "we worked hard all last night and didn't catch a thing." What Luke doesn't record is him probably saying, "I'm glad you finished speaking now because I can beach my boat and go home and get some rest before I have to go out tonight and fish again." But he doesn't. He says, but if you say so, I'll let the nets down again. And this time their nets were so full of fish, they began to tear. A shout for help brought their partners in the other boat, and soon both boats were filled with fish and on the verge of sinking. When Simon Peter realized what had happened, he fell to his knees before Jesus and said, "Oh Lord, please leave me. I'm such a sinful man." Because you see, when we come face to face with grace, there is clear evidence. There's no question of, what was that? Was that grace? Was it kindness? No. When we come face to face with grace, there is evidence of that happening. The Desire of Ages, written by Ellen White, tells us that when Peter spoke these words, "Oh Lord, please leave me, I'm such a sinful man," he had his hands around Jesus' feet and was clinging onto him. So even though he says, "Please leave me," having come face to face with grace, he knows he cannot let it go. He was awestruck by the number of fish they had caught, as were the others with him. His partners James and John were also amazed. And Jesus replies to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing for people." And as soon as they landed, they left everything and followed Jesus. When you come face to face with grace, the evidence is compelling. And it causes action. It causes a change in your life that only Jesus can bring about. You see, Peter's humility and awareness of his sin, and the same with us, our shortcomings and our drawbacks don't disqualify us from following God and being in his service. They're the prerequisite. They're the requirement to be in his service. Because that's what grace is. Grace is everything about God, everything from Jesus, and nothing from us. We don't bring anything to that. It's all Jesus. Jesus uses grace to turn a miracle into a mission. The figurative catch of fish for these professional fishermen turns into the literal, turns into the figurative fishers of men, where they are so changed by being face to face with grace that all they want to do is give other people that opportunity to meet grace face to face as well. Jesus turns miracle into mission. And so we see, when you come face to face with grace, there's evidence of that having happened. But we are going to look today as well at what the enemy of grace is and how Jesus and us in turn can exercise that grace. The evidence of grace, the enemy of grace, and the exercise of grace. Because the opposite of the state of grace, Philip Yancey calls this ungrace. Ungrace is epitomized by selfishness as opposed to the selflessness of grace. The next little vignette from Peter's life I'd like to share with you to illustrate how the enemy of grace works is when Jesus is sitting with his disciples and he's just shared with them, and the Bible says he speaks plainly about his death and what he must suffer in the coming week. When he hears this doesn't sit well with Peter. And in Matthew, the very first gospel, it's recorded this way. Matthew, who was also one of Jesus' disciples, a tax collector, experienced rejection from his own people. He was an outcast. But when he came face to face with grace, Jesus included him. And this is how he describes what happened. But Peter took him aside and began to reprimand him for saying such things. "Heaven forbid, Lord," he said, "this will never happen to you." Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You're seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." The enemy of grace is when we see things from our point of view. When we allow Satan, the king of the kingdom of ungrace, to influence us to the extent that we forget that grace is all about God's point of view, not ours. Our point of view is very small. We have no idea, looking through our Chihuahua eyes, what it might look like from another perspective. None of you take this literally. I'm not saying that God is a Great Dane or that you're a Chihuahua. But it's just to illustrate the enemy of grace is when we limit God. We limit God's grace and His goodness and His love and His power by seeing things through our perspective, not seeing the big picture. The reason that Jesus rebuked Peter so severely is that Peter wanted the kingdom without the cross. From a human point of view, he just wanted the Romans overthrown, the Jewish nation restored to its rightful place in the world. And he wasn't prepared to understand and open his heart to the real grace that was necessary to establish a kingdom far greater than what he was imagining, a kingdom that would last forever. Fast forward a few more days, and the events that Jesus spoke about, which got Peter to reprimand him, start to happen. They've finished with the supper, and they're on their way to the Garden of Gethsemane, hours away from Jesus being arrested and tortured. And Jesus says to his disciples, "Tonight, all of you will desert me." Peter, who else, declares, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you." And now I'd like to move back to the Gospel of Luke to record a few things that are not recorded in Matthew. Now I can just imagine Jesus turning to Peter and the repeating of his name, "Simon, Simon," just expresses all the love and grace that Jesus shows to Peter. He says, and here we have the enemy of grace appearing again, "Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat." Satan asks to sift each of us like wheat in 2019. If it didn't happen to you in 2018, I can guarantee you it will happen in 2019. Our enemy, the enemy of grace, the king of the kingdom of ungrace, all he wants is to take us apart. So Jesus says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat. But I have pleaded for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. Notice that Jesus doesn't say, I have pleaded that you won't fail, that you won't fall, that you won't make mistakes, that you won't give in to your human weakness. No. What Jesus prays for is that Peter's faith doesn't fail. And in that is an incredibly powerful lesson for us, because we've all failed, and we will fail. I don't know all of you, but I know that about you. In the next days, in the next year, you will fail. And we sometimes let that discourage us. We sometimes allow our failures to whisper in our ears that it's not worth it. You can't make it. You're not good enough. But Jesus says, in the way that only grace can, I'm praying for you. I'm praying that your faith will not fail. So that when you have repented and turned to me again, strengthen your brothers. Peter doesn't quite grasp what Jesus is saying to him now. He still doesn't quite get it. He's still full of his bravado, still full of his human strength, still ready to die for Jesus. He says, Lord, I'm ready to go to prison with you and even die with you. And Jesus is very plain and direct. And sometimes that's the graceful thing to do to people in our lives. Sometimes that's how God speaks to us in grace. He doesn't hide things. He's totally honest with us, as Jesus is with Peter. He says, Peter, let me tell you something. Before the rooster crows tomorrow, you will deny me. You're saying right now that you're prepared to go to jail and even die for me? Well, I'm telling you, this is the reality. You will deny that you even know me. We know that the best of, what do they say, the road to hell is paved with the best intentions. Jesus is, in short order, arrested by a mob in that garden. Peter, with that bravado still coursing through his veins, grabs his sword and aims to decapitate one of the servants of the high priest. But the priest moves his head to the side just in time, and Peter only manages to take off an ear. Jesus says to him, put away your sword. He reaches over and in an act of exercising grace, heals the ear of a man who has come to arrest him, lead him to death on trumped up charges. And he takes the time to exercise grace. Peter is exposed. He and the rest of the disciples flee, leaving Jesus to be dragged off by the mob. John, the disciple that seems to have understood grace the best, finds out that Jesus is being put on trial at the high priest's residence. And because he's known to the high priest, he's allowed entrance into the courtyard, into the room where Jesus is being tried. And he says, Peter, come with me. Peter comes in, but seems to linger in the courtyard, not quite as committed as John is. The word describing the fire that people are warming their hands around in the courtyard describes an anthracite fire, generating a lot of heat but not much light. And in the dark, flickering shadows, one of the servants looks across at Peter and says, wait a minute, aren't you one of his followers? And Peter denies it. His strength has completely failed him. A little bit later, maybe someone stokes the fire and the flames flicker more brightly for a minute. And the servant girl says, yes, now that I see your face, I'm sure you were with him. Second time, Peter denies it. And the third time, when he's pressed to admit that he has given his life to the Master of grace, he denies it for the third time. And as the words are leaving his mouth, he hears the rooster crow. And suddenly, his world falls apart. He goes out and weeps bitterly. But because this is a story of being face to face with grace, it doesn't end there for Peter. And no matter how many times you in this last year have wept bitterly, and you may well weep bitterly again in 2019, I want to tell you that that's not where it needs to end. Going to the last gospel, the Gospel of John, he records this, the very last chapter, in his account of Jesus. The disciples, they know that Jesus has risen, but they're waiting for direction and what to do next. Peter especially finds the waiting so hard because of the way that he left Jesus, having denied him. And he can't handle sitting around doing nothing anymore. The thoughts in his head are too loud, so he says, let's go fishing. Come on. And so the 6 or 7 other disciples that were with him get into the boat and they go out and they fish. And as much as Peter wants this catch to take his mind off what's troubling him, they catch no fish. And nearing shore again, the Bible says they're about 100 yards offshore, when they notice someone standing on the beach, and he calls out to them, "Hey lads, have you caught anything?" And they say, "No." Jesus says, "Throw your nets on the other side." And again, as an echo of the first evidence of grace when Jesus came into their lives, once again, grace fills their nets to bursting. And when this happens, Peter knows for sure who that is on the beach. And it's a sign of God, of Jesus exercising grace, his reaction. You know the people that you've hurt, that you haven't dealt with so well. You see them in the mall, and it's like, oh, something else that I really need to do right now, rather than spend time with that person. Not Peter. He knows Jesus, and he knows Jesus' grace so well. He jumps out of the boat, splashes through the water, and goes to Jesus. They have breakfast together on the beach, an awesome fish braai. And after breakfast, Jesus says to Peter, in front of the other disciples, who all know that Peter denied Jesus, who have serious questions about Peter and his ability and fitness to lead the early church. They think Peter has disqualified himself from ever holding that responsibility. In front of them, Jesus says, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He asked that specifically because Peter was boastful before. He said, even if everybody else leaves you, I will never leave you. Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied, you know I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know I love you. And in an echo of the 3 denials of Peter, Jesus asks Peter the 3rd time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a 3rd time. He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said, then feed my sheep. You see, when we have the evidence of grace in our lives, when we understand that we need protection against the enemy of grace, and we have grace exercised to us, there's only one thing we can do, and that is we can exercise grace to others. And that's what Jesus calls Peter to do. Feed my sheep. Remembering his own weakness and failure, Peter was to deal with his flock as tenderly as Christ had dealt with him. You see, Jesus exercises grace to us from a place of perfection, of perfect love. We exercise grace to others from a place of brokenness, from a place of understanding that no one, no matter what they've done, is better than me. However good I think I am just as in need of grace as anyone else. And that realization helps us to exercise grace to God's sheep. This is Peter, the same Peter who later writes in the 2 epistles. The same Peter that was so full of bravado, wanted things his own way. No, Jesus, don't talk about dying. This is what's going to happen, and I'm going to fight for you, and I'll go to prison. This is what Peter says in 1 Peter 3, verse 8. Finally, all of you should be of one mind. Sympathize with each other. Love each other as brothers and sisters. Be tender-hearted and keep a humble attitude. Don't repay evil for evil. This is the same Peter that chopped off someone's ear. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. That is what God has called you to do, and He will grant you His blessing. My prayer, as we ask the band to come back up, and we'll sing Amazing Grace together, my prayer for you is that you will come face to face with grace. And that God, more than you coming face to face with grace in the new year, that God will use you to bring His grace to someone else's face too. Amen.